chasing, living streets like this all over London.
Trevor Williams is a private investigator at Diligence, a corporate intelligence firm that conducts complex cross-border investigations. He was working on this elaborate fraud case when the trail led him to this address in North London. From this side of the gate, we can't see that much, but an old estate agent's brochure gives me an insight into the opulence. Inside, there's a sweeping marble staircase, a 50-foot ballroom, and a private dining room, which it says gives unlimited potential for grand entertaining.
We were brought in to investigate where the missing $5 to $10 billion were. During that investigation, we unwound a labyrinth of over 3,000 companies, and one of those companies gave money which eventually was used to purchase a golden visa.
Trevor Williams chases assets and money around the world. He was brought in to investigate the whereabouts of billions of pounds that had gone missing from the BTA Bank in Kazakhstan. His target was a man called Mukhtar Ablyazov.
He was the chairman of BTA Bank. He'd increased the capital of the bank by various rounds of funding, and it was one of the most prominent banks in Kazakhstan. And during the banking crisis, the assessment was made and the bank was failing, and auditors and accountants were brought in to look at the balance sheet of the bank, and a quick assessment of that showed that there was between $5 and $10 billion missing from the bank, and it had been wired out in loans to fictitious companies, offshore companies with no trading history. Had been loaned hundreds of millions of pounds.
£5 to £10 billion missing.
Yes, $5 to $10 billion.
Mukhtar Ablyazov fled Kazakhstan, he says, as a political exile and took up residence in London on what's become known as a billionaire's row. Investigator Trevor Williams had to prove this lavish lifestyle was being funded by the missing money. It involved painstaking surveillance. So how long were you watching this house?
Yeah, I think we were probably in total in the area for about a year, at least a year.
How do you stake out a house for a year?
I think you just have to limit your exposure in terms of how much you're in and around the house versus how often you can be further down the road.
It's a bit more complicated than sitting across the road with a newspaper open.
Yeah, it has long, boring, tedious work.
By now, investigators were using a nearby cafe as a meeting point, and the surveillance had paid off. They found Mr. Ablyazov was using a storage facility near his home called Yellow Box, and they'd noticed late-night visits to the warehouse. They were convinced that inside would be clues to where the missing money had gone, so they secured a civil seizure order to raid the lockup.
I think everyone was very anxious at the time. We were hoping that we hadn't got it wrong, hoping that we weren't just going to open a door to find nothing there. So we went to the Yellow Box facility and we served the order on the young receptionist. He had a look who was the nominated representative and phoned them. We were waiting for someone to come and nobody did, and therefore we proceeded on and we moved up onto the third floor with a large pair of bolt cutters.
So there you are, you spent years tracking this man. When they open the doors or pull up the shutters, what do you find?
It's just full of boxes. It's just full of square legal boxes and what look like computer servers and all sorts of papers and documents. Effectively, I think it broke the back of the case. It's sort of the jackpot.
What he found was a veritable treasure map. Papers and computer files that allowed analysts to trace how the money had been lost from the bank. A cascade of transactions ended up at a company called Sunstone Ventures, registered in the British Virgin Islands. And among eye-watering financial flows, they noticed that just over £1 million of this money had been gifted to Mr. Ablyazov's teenage son, Madiar. When they traced the money even further, they discovered that a few years earlier, in 2009, his son had used this money to pay for a Tier 1 investor visa, and with it, a route to British citizenship.
The money moved down through a structure of companies, and companies such as Sunstone would be at the end, and they do that by loaning intercompany loans to one company, then loan to another company, then going to another company, so they move it through
a Tier 1 investor visa and a golden visa. Get ready.
In the name of both Mukhtar and his son, and then eventually the money is given to his son as a gift.
So money that is arguably proceeds of crime has been gifted to his son and then passed over to get citizenship.
Yeah, exactly, yes.
So the money that was...
So started off travelling. I am travelling to Sheffield, and I am filming the sky as I travel. Interesting forms of white clusters in the sky, we'll call them clouds. And this came on BBC Radio 4 on the 10th of June at 5 o'clock.
Extensive litigation in the High Court, with more than £5 billion of judgments awarded against him. An appeal court judge was in his assessment of him.
It is difficult to imagine commercial litigation who is acted with more cynicism, opportunism and deviousness than Mr. Ablyazov.
Ablyazov fled the UK when he was told he was being jailed for contempt of court. He's now living in France. Through his lawyers, he told us the allegations were politically driven by a corrupt central agent regime where there is no rule of law. He says he wasn't siphoning money from the bank. On the contrary, he says BTA Bank was unlawfully nationalised and pillaged by the Kazakh government, and he was, in fact, protecting the assets from them. Mr. Ablyazov also denies the money gifted to his son was in any way dirty. There's no suggestion his son Madiar was involved in the fraud. His lawyer said he adhered to all required standards and was open about where the money came from. But there are mounting concerns that the UK's investor scheme is an easy hiding place for illicit funds.
You don't say. Oh dear.
Individuals will find it really hard to steal public money, for example, if they don't have a safe place to hide it and a safe place to run to. And because of the way the golden visa system was set up here, I believe the UK was essentially providing that safe place.
Yes.
Rachel Davies-Taka is head of advocacy at the anti-corruption campaign group Transparency International UK. The Tier 1 investor visa was introduced in 2008. She says for the first 7 years, the Home Office operated on a period of blind faith.
Oh God.
Thinking, erroneously as it turned out, that others were doing the necessary checks.
Oh
Through
dear.
our investigations and our research, we discovered that no real anti-money laundering checks were done on the source of this wealth during those 7 years.
Masonic Home Office officers.
Reason for concern.
And when you say there were no checks, who wasn't doing the checks?
So we interviewed officials at the Home Office. They said, well, in the initial 7 years of the scheme, we would actually grant the visa before the individuals invested the money, and we would just trust that the financial institutions would do what they usually do and do the usual anti-money laundering checks. Now, when we went to speak to people in the financial institutions, they told us, well, actually, if you're looking at an individual and they were coming through on this scheme and we possibly had some concerns, we would say, hang on a second, the Home Office has already given them a visa. I'm sure they've done the checks. I'm sure it's fine. And those checks weren't carried out.
Almost 3,000 people came into the UK during that period, bringing with them at least £3 billion. At a time, Rachel Davies-Taka believes it was highly vulnerable to abuse. More than half the visas went to applicants from Russia and China, countries with a high corruption risk. In 2014-15, the Home Office tightened the rules. The investment doubled to $2 million, and all applicants would have to use a UK bank account, putting the onus on the financial services sector to do the necessary.
The FSA.
Rachel Davies-Taka believes that this blind faith period opened the door to criminality.
What was really concerning
For fuck's sake.
over the 3,000 individuals that invested in the UK during the blind faith period, and we have asked the Home Office for information on, okay, how many of these political officials or associates, can you give us the names of these individuals so we can cross-check against people we know who've been involved in corruption and illicit activity, but the Home Office hasn't published that information, so we're a bit in the dark, really.
Oh, haven't they?
Transparency International, we have a high degree of suspicion that there was dirty money coming in through this scheme.
Last month, the Commons Foreign Affairs Committee accused the UK of turning a blind eye to illicit funds coming in from Russia in particular. The Home Office say, after the rule change, applications for the Tier 1 plummeted by 84%. They said they're now taking another look at how the scheme works and running further checks on those who came in before the reforms.
What a joke.
In the Mayfair offices of immigration law firm Weskin Associates. The signs are the super wealthy heading to Britain, still receive a light touch service.
So this is where we keep the paper versions of our applications. So I've picked up here an entrepreneur application and a tier 1 investor.
There's a huge difference in size. One is, I'd say 50 to 100 pages, and one is like a full labour arch file.
Yeah, you can see obviously the entrepreneur visa has 4 requirements, whereas the investor only has 1. And the majority of this in the entrepreneur application is basically the applicant having to prove themselves to the Home Office. Whereas with the investor, the reason why it's so slim and most of it being the application form itself is because there's only 1 requirement, and that is completely objective.
It's just your bank statements.
Yeah, you could put it that way.
Fucking what?
Lawyer Human Mayer handles the
What a fucking joke!
immigration applications, anything from asylum to entrepreneurs, but he specialises in the UK Tier 1 investor visa. He says compared to the others, it's altogether a lot more straightforward.
So the investor visa is like no other visa in essence. It only has 1 requirement.
You don't say.
You have 2 million. It's a completely objective visa, unlike all other visa applications which have some form of subjectivity. Of course, there's still going to be standard checks like criminality and anti-money laundering, but yeah, if you have the money, they'll give you the visa.
And what kind of checks do other people who are coming in on, say, an entrepreneurial visa, what do they have to do that you don't have to do on an investor visa?
So those are much more stringent. So with entrepreneurs looking to invest in a UK company, and that's still 200,000, so it's a fair amount, they will have to provide a business plan, they will have to provide evidence of their experience, they'll most probably have to do an interview. Even if the funds are in their account, there'll be questions of how they obtain these funds. So there's a lot more subjectivity compared to the investor visa.
Golden visas, for want of a better term, are more popular amongst people who come from countries that have higher risk of corruption than others. Do you think that's just a coincidence?
I think it is a coincidence. If you live in a country that has corruption, you probably want to get away from that corruption, especially if you're a high net worth individual. That's not to say that you are involved in the corruption yourself, but you might want to come to a safe haven where you feel like you won't be impacted by that corruption. So there's definitely a correlation there, but I wouldn't say there's a causation.
The trade in second or third passports is a lucrative one, and one of the biggest players in the world is Henley & Partners. They help the super rich decide where to apply and advise governments who want to set up golden visa schemes of their own. Their website boasts of the magic combination of 14 passports that could, in theory at least, grant you visa-free access to the entire world.
More and more of us are becoming global citizens, and over the next 2 days, you will hear from those countries that have adapted, that have embraced this new reality, and I hope that all of you here will as well.
In 2016, they held their 10th annual conference at the Savoy in London, attended by the great and the good, including Hollywood actors and representatives from international governments.
We're happy that we're working now with Henley & Partners to create an even brighter future for our country.
So the firm has actually published a book which they describe as the quintessential guide for global citizens and their advisors, and we got our hands on a copy, and it looks exactly like a shopping catalogue. It offers citizenship of different countries ranked by traits like rule of law or tax arrangements, whatever it is that takes your fancy. It even says what the weather is like in Edinburgh, although I'm not sure that's its strongest selling point. Here in Europe, their biggest contract to date was signed with the Maltese government 4 years ago. So we're boarding a flight to the capital, Valletta, to find out more. Henley & Partners are positively evangelical about what the passport scheme has achieved here. They credit it with effectively reversing a budget deficit that's been in place for as long as statistics have existed, raising almost €400 million in the 12 months to July 17. And across the peninsula, there are clear signs an economic upturn is underway. We're on a boat crossing the harbour from Valletta towards Salima, which is one of the areas on the island experiencing a bit of a construction boom. Wow. You can see the skyline is dotted with cranes, and there's lots of new high-rise apartments going up, aimed mostly at the wealthy newcomers. We're on our way to meet one of the scores of agents who advise them on the passport scheme.
So we're literally in the heart of St. Julian's. You've got over there.
To be talked about very, very shortly on YouTube live. Oh wow, this is getting uploaded as the original talking point video. The video, the transmission to end all transmissions. End transmission. Indigo out.